Good morning. Glad to see you this morning. Mike is out of town, but he'll be back next week. We start a new section this morning and a study about the tabernacle in the wilderness with Moses and the children of Israel. So, there's a lot to discuss about that, and so I guess we can get started. Turn with me to Exodus chapter 27. There's several references to this, but concerning the tabernacle. But this is where the instructions are given to Moses concerning the tabernacle of how to build it. Exodus chapter 27. This morning we're going to be talking about the outer court, and I'm handing around some pictures. This is a scale picture of a scale model, and I have a cheap copier that only does black and white, so there you go. That's all it is in black and white. But you can make out some things that we'll be talking about this morning. Over in Exodus 27, beginning in verse 9, and we're just going to, it's a lengthy portion of Scripture, but we'll read through it. And it says, "And thou shalt make the court of the tabernacle. For the south side, southward, there shall be hangings for the court of fine twined linen, of 100 cubits long for one side." In other words, it's 100, I guess you could say in depth or deep or long, it's 100 cubits. And verse 10, "And the 20 pillars thereof, and their 20 sockets shall be of brass." Now, that's King James, but it's believed that those sockets, those bases, were of bronze. And it says, "The hooks of the pillars and their fillets shall be of silver." It's believed that that's an old King James word, and it means a cap or a capital of the pillars shall be of silver. "And likewise for the north side in length there shall be hangings of 100 cubits long, and his 20 pillars and their 20 sockets of brass, the hooks of the pillars and their fillets of silver. And for the breadth of the court on the west side shall be hangings of 50 cubits, their pillars 10 and their sockets 10. So it's 100 cubits long and 50 cubits wide. It's twice as long as it is wide. And it's talking then the pillars that would be on the long side are 20, and the pillars on the short side, let me see, I don't want to get confused, I probably will be, were 10. And it says in the breadth of the court, verse 13, on the east side eastward shall be 50 cubits. And the hangings of one side of the gate shall be 15 cubits, their pillars 3, and their sockets 3. Now he's talking about the eastern side of the tabernacle, and it is to face east. And you can see that picture. And on one side is 15 cubits, on the other side of the curtain is 15 cubits. And then the door or the entrance gate would be 20 cubits. And so, let me see, we're going down here to verse 15, verse 16. "And for the gate of the court," verse 16, "for the gate of the court shall be a hanging of 20 cubits of blue and purple and scarlet and fine twined linen wrought with needlework. And their pillars shall be 4 and their sockets 4. All the pillars round about the court shall be filleted with silver." In other words, the caps or capitals on top of the pillars will be silver. "Their hooks shall be of silver, and their sockets of brass or bronze. The length of the court shall be 100 cubits, and the breadth 50 everywhere, and the height 5 cubits, of fine twined linen, and their sockets of brass." Now notice this, "All the vessels of the tabernacle and all the service thereof and all the pins or the the tent stakes, I guess you could say, all the pins thereof, and all the pins of the court shall be of brass or of bronze. So here are the instructions for this outer court. You have the fine twined linen, which would be white. It would be a bright white that he is talking about as far as that outer curtain. You have 60 pillars all the way around, 20 on one side, 20 on the other long side, 10 on the west, 10 on the east. And these pillars are made out of acacia wood. They're made out of wood, and they're set in sockets on the ground of, King James says brass, but it'd be of bronze. Bronze is a mixture of copper and tin that they make. And so, and bronze was a stronger metal than copper. But that's the sockets that they sat upon. And then on top of the pillar, you have this silver cap. You have hooks that are either on the cap or into the wood, that the ropes, the guy ropes, I guess you could say, went down to these bronze pins, tent stakes, on the outside and the inside. And so the curtain was held up. It's also believed, and you can barely see it, that between the pillars at the top was a rod, probably made of acacia wood also, and then coated with silver or plated with silver, that went between the pillars and gave support that direction. And off of these rods hung these linen curtains for the outside of the outer court. And then on the east side, where the tabernacle faced, you had this 20 cubit. Now, just in our measurements, it would be about 75 feet wide by 150 feet long. That's what they figured. There's all kinds of variations on the size of a cubit. Just out of curiosity, I measured my cubit, and what it's supposed to be is from the elbow to the tip of your middle finger. And mine turned out to be, it's a common measurement for the cubit was 17 and a half inches, which was mine. But there's a lot of variation on the size of a cubit. But it would come out to be about 150 feet long by 75 feet wide. And then the height, if you read there, the height of the curtain was to be 5 cubits, which comes out to be about 7.5 feet tall. And so here we have the basic outline of the outside, and then back to that curtain, the entranceway right in the middle. It's a broad, that's a good application, is that this gate is broad and inviting, and it's colored with these different colors. The rest of the linen was solid white. But this, you had the linen of white, but embroidered into that with fine needlework, and this is this person's interpretation of that. We don't know exactly what it would have looked like, but I would imagine under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit and the talents and skills inspired by the Holy Spirit, that it was probably something that stood out, was very approachable and inviting, and that was the entrance gate to the outer court. And its colors were blue and purple and scarlet, and then the white linen background. Now, the symbolism of those is that you have, of course, the white linen that stands out, that as you would approach the tabernacle, you would see that white linen and the purity of it. The purity would be the most dramatic part, in my opinion, of what would stand out as you first approached the outer court of the tabernacle, is all of that white linen out in the desert with and the tents. Most of the tents that the people had would be of a dark color. I heard even black goat hair would be in their tents, and so you have all the drabness of the desert and of their tents that they live in, And as they come to the tabernacle, I mean, here's this brightness of this linen. And as they approach from the east side, that here's this gate or entrance door of blue and purple and scarlet and on the white linen, embroidered on the white linen. And the symbolism of the blue is heavenly. And these are all types of Christ. That he is the door, he is the way, and he is from heaven. We have the purple, which is of the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. We have the scarlet, which is representative of the blood that was shed for the remission of sins. And so all of these things are incorporated in. How much they understood of that at that time, we don't know. They may have had a very clear understanding of what God was trying to do amongst men. And this gate represents that, and the colors. And then the pillars themselves of acacia wood and the bronze represented judgment, folks. That's what the altar was made out of. It was made out of the acacia wood, but that it was encased in bronze, all of bronze. And so you had the bronze altar, and then even the laver. You can't hardly see the laver in this picture, but it's between the altar and the holy place. And you can barely see these figures with containers around the laver and the water in it. But it was made out of bronze. Totally, it was, as far as we know, it was pure bronze. It did not have any acacia wood in it. And so here you have this bronze. Bronze is the basis of the pillars, bronze of the altar, the bronze of the laver. All of this is judgment. It all reflects and symbolizes judgment. The pins, the tent stakes, I guess you could say, they were all bronze. I just read the last verse, all the vessels of the tabernacle, the pans, the bowls, the buckets, whatever was used were made out of bronze. It's all of judgment, and it all speaks of judgment. But then, and that was the basis of these pillars, and then you have the acacia wood that in my mind speaks of humanity. It speaks of human nature, of which Christ was. He took upon him the form of a servant, as we read in Colossians. And that the humanity, not only his but ours, but then it's capped with silver, and silver is symbolic of redemption. And so at the base you have judgment, and as the pillar we have our humanity and human nature and character, but then it's capped with redemption. And so even the pins and the stakes outward are of bronze or of bronze, and they reflect judgment. Now, if you look at this, we're going to kind of wander off here a little bit, but as you look at this, the thing that stood out to me was how small the courtyard was. It would have been basically a little bit larger than this sanctuary here. You know, I didn't measure it, but I don't know exactly, but it might have been a little bit, like 10 feet further in width, but probably about the depth of what we have here. As I pondered that, some say that the children of Israel, when they left Egypt, there was 2 million of them. Well, if there was that many, or even if there were several hundreds of thousands, that's a lot of people. And look and see how small the sanctuary was. That interested me. And so as I began to think about it, and so let's kind of think about that for a second, is that there's some scriptures, but here it is, and the tabernacle was meant to be put into the very center of the camp of the Israelites, the very center of it. But as they formed around, God gave them specific instructions how to camp around the tabernacle. Now, we're not going to get in depth into that, but it does say in Numbers 2:2, it says, every man of the children of Israel shall pitch by his own standard with the ensign of their father's house. But then it says this, far off about the tabernacle of the congregation shall they pitch. So yes, there was a specific order about how the tribes were to camp around the tabernacle, but they were to camp afar off. Now let's get into that. Okay, and then it says in Numbers 1:51 and 53, right before that, it says, and when the tabernacle setteth forward, the Levites shall take it down, and when the tabernacle is to be pitched, the Levites shall set it up. And the stranger, listen to this, and the stranger that cometh nigh shall be put to death. Oh. And the children of Israel shall pitch their tents, every man by his own camp, and every man by his own standard throughout their hosts. But the Levites shall pitch round about the tabernacle of testimony. Listen, that there be no wrath upon the congregation of the children of Israel. And the Levites shall keep charge of the tabernacle of the testimony. So you have the tribes of Israel encamped around the tabernacle. It's in the center of the camp. But they are to camp afar off. There's no specific distance given, but they are to camp afar off. And then right around the tabernacle were the families of Levi, the groups of Levi. And they had a specific order. But do you read where it says there that they were to protect, to have charge of the tabernacle? And that, I mean, if someone approached the tabernacle that should not, for whatever reasons, that was a death penalty. They were to guard it to the point of death. Now let that just kind of wander around in your mind for a moment. And they were to encamp around the tabernacle on the north and the west and the south side, and that the families of Levi were to encamp around that. But on the east side, only Moses and his family and Aaron and his family as the priest were to camp on the east side. Well, that's going to be important because that's all that's on the east. Think about that. That's all that's on the east side. It says in Numbers 3:38, but those that encamp before the tabernacle towards the east, even before the tabernacle of the congregation eastward, shall be Moses and Aaron and his sons, keeping the charge of the sanctuary for the charge of the children of Israel. And the stranger that cometh nigh shall be put to death. I mean, some serious language about all of this. So here you have this small tabernacle that, I mean, you can see that just with this group, this is a scale model. This picture I gave you is a scale model of that. And you can see that it would take nothing for it to be very crowded. And then on top of that, God is instructing that the tabernacle would be encircled by the Levites, who have, I mean, a serious responsibility to maintain the sanctity of the sanctuary, and then that the rest of the camp is to camp afar off. And so putting all that together, you're going, well, what is to be done? How are they to operate with all of this? let's just, as far as protecting the sanctuary, let's just consider a couple other thoughts. If you look in front of that gate or the front door, you can barely see a couple of priests standing there, and they're talking to a man in a different dress. And he has a donkey on a rope, is what that is, if you can't see it. Well, there was stationed outside the gate even porters and gatekeepers of the priesthood. They were to guard the sanctuary. And so this man's trying to bring a donkey up to the sanctuary, and they're saying, no, that you can't do that. That is not permissible. And one of the main functions of the priesthood, as I just gave you there, is they were to protect the tabernacle, the sanctuary. Now, I'll just read Ezekiel 22:26. Apparently that over the years and as time passed, there was problems with this and problems with the priests. And it says in Ezekiel 22:26, her priests have violated my law and have profaned my holy things. They have put no difference. They have put no difference between the holy and the profane. Neither have they showed difference between the unclean and the clean, and have hid their eyes from my Sabbath, and I am profaned among them. Now, Ezekiel had recognized that amongst the priests at his time, that they had not fulfilled their responsibility concerning the temple, concerning even the sanctuary, as we'll see here in a moment. But we could see that this was an ongoing problem. If you go to Malachi, you go to the book of Malachi, chapters 1 and 2, you find out, I believe in chapters 1:8, Malachi is saying, go offer your blind and sick offerings to the governor, the Persian governor, and see if he accepts it, and he accepts your person. But you are bringing that to me, and they are doing exactly what Ezekiel's talking about. They are profaning the worship of God. And they are making no difference between the profane and the holy and the clean and unclean. They're making no difference with it. And so although God charged the Levites and charged the priests with protecting the sanctuary and doing these things, that many, many times they failed to do it. And then if you go to Malachi chapter 2, he talks directly to the priests about what they had done and had not done. And so you see, here is this small tabernacle. Here it's surrounded by the Levites. Here we see that it is to be guarded and protected, and that there should be that the clean and unclean should be distinguished, the holy and unholy, a difference should be made, and that the priests were to teach the people. But there was a problem, and I mean there was an immediate problem, and that if you go to Leviticus 10:9, you find out that even during the priests were being dedicated, and they were to spend 7 days within the tabernacle. It's when the initial dedication, and they were spent. But even during this time, if you read in Leviticus 10:9 and 10, Aaron's two sons, eldest two sons, Nadab and Abihu, during this dedication, they messed up. And in response, God slew them. They offered strange fire. They put incense in their incense, and they went into the holies of holies and offered strange fire unto God, and God slew them. These are priests now, even during the 7-day dedication. I mean, it's starting out kind of on the wrong foot. And God says this in Leviticus 10:9 and 10, do not drink wine nor strong drink, thou nor thy sons with thee, when you go into the tabernacle of the congregation, lest ye die. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations. Listen, verse 10. and that ye may put difference between holy and unholy, between unclean and clean. And they lost it. But are you following my train of thought here? Here's this small sanctuary. It's surrounded by Levites who are to have charge of it, to protect it, even on the pain of death of those who would come and violate it. You have Aaron and Moses on the east side at the door who should have a stronger motivation to protect and keep the way into the sanctuary. They are protected even to the point of death. Here we see the priests that God has charged them that they are to make a difference and even teach a difference to the people. If you in Leviticus 10, 9 and 11, it goes on and teach the people the commandments of God. That was what they're to do. Well, that has broken down many, many times with the Jews and with the people of God. That responsibility, that charge has not been carried out many, many times. When Chili's wanted to come into Pleasanton, Pleasanton was I don't know what you want to call it. You couldn't get mixed drinks in Pleasanton. It was dry, I guess you'd call it that. Of course, they had liquor stores, and you get beer and all. It was all there, but you couldn't get mixed drinks. Well, Chili's wanted to serve mixed drinks. They wanted a bar. Well, they had to get a city ordinance to do it. Well, I didn't like that. And I didn't think it's right. So we had a ministers' fellowship, and so I started talking around about getting a petition of having pastors sign that against that ordinance and against the permitting mixed drinks. And we almost came within a few votes of not getting that ordinance passed. But it passed and Chili's came to town. And now, okay. But calling around and talking to some pastors, and now I'll just say one pastor in particular, he's just saying, well, he even mentioned how large a church. I pastor a church of so many members, and I can't sign that petition. I can't do that. So I don't know. Of course, there's a lot of different opinions on drinking, but the way he came across to me is that he had a large membership in his church, and he didn't want to affect that membership by coming out against that ordinance and drinking. I don't know. That's just one thing that just comes to my mind, and it was really sad. I think it would have mattered if he would have come out against it. Over the years, over the centuries, over the millennia, these things have broken down many times. That responsibility to distinguish between the holy and the unholy, between the clean and the unclean. And we're not talking about necessarily condemnation, but we are talking about distinguishing between them. There is a difference. Now, and let's think about this outer court and this. What it boils down to is you have a fence here. You have a fence. Now, it's a very beautiful fence. It's not a barbed wire fence, It's not just, it's a very beautiful fence with linen and wood and silver and bronze and all of that. But it's still a fence. And folks, we need to understand the principle of boundaries. We need to understand that there is a difference. That we need to understand that there is a point there is a fence, there is a place that you go from the holy to the unholy. You go from the clean to the unclean. There ought to be something in our life. There ought to be something in our life that, yeah, there's all kinds of things that go on in the world. There's all kinds of things that are out there. But there ought to be a fence. There ought to be a boundary. There ought to be a point to where we say, I'm not going any further than that. Do you understand what I'm saying? We raised our kids in Houston, our oldest one anyway, and I mean, we had to set boundaries. We told her, you go out there and you can play in that backyard. You can have all the fun you want in that backyard, but don't you get out of that backyard. And I look out there, and there she is. She liked a little neighbor boy, and she's about halfway up that chain link fence, wanting to try to get up over that fence and go next door to play with that boy. So I had to go out there and teach her not to do that. I look out there, and she's standing on the curb, and I'm on the driveway right at the edge of the street. Don't go in the street. Don't go past that point. And she's standing there, and I'm watching her from inside and from the window, and just wondering what she's going to do. And pretty soon, there she goes. And I had to go out there and to teach her not to do that. Play in your yard, have all the fun you want, but you don't cross that curb and go in the street. Are you following what I'm saying? And when you come to your job and you go to your job, or you're dealing with the things of this world, there needs to be a point in your life that I'll go this far but no further. And no matter what happens, no matter what the circumstances here are, I will not go further than that point. There is a difference between the clean and the unclean, the holy and the profane. And I will not pass beyond it. I will not do that. I know we can say, well, there's little white lies, and there can be all kinds of discussions of ethics and morals, and, is it really a lie if you do this? Is it really a lie if you do that? I don't know. There can be a lot of discussion. But is there a point in our life where we say, no more? On the job where the pressures are and all the things are coming towards us. You do this, you do that, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. And okay, so maybe there is a gray area that you wander around in. I understand that. I've had to deal with it. But there reaches a point where you say, no, I can't do that. And if I have to do that to keep this job, well, then I'll go look for another job. That this is a fence, whatever. Like I said, it's a beautiful fence with a lot of symbolism, with bronze for judgment, for silver for redemption, for humanity, and the linen. But what hangs upon it is purity, and it's all beautiful. But it's a fence and it's a boundary, and folks, there has to be boundaries in our life. And we need to teach boundaries. That when we have this, it's just that, look, what's, I'm growing up, well, everybody else is doing it. Everybody else is doing it. Well, we're not. And you can do this and you can do that, but we're not going to do it. This isn't going to happen. It isn't going to be done. Wow. Well, let's see. And here is this. I'm talking about all these restrictions on the tabernacle, so what were the people to do? Turn with me to Exodus 33, 8 through 10, or you can listen to one. Here's this little bitty courtyard that, there's people that come in there and they do, but that is small. I mean, if you look at it there, just, with a cow or two in there, some sheep, some goats, all them priests doing one thing or another, that's a small area. So what were the people to do? In Exodus 33, verses 8 through 10, it says, and it came to pass, this is Exodus 33, 8 through 10, came to pass when Moses went out to the tabernacle that all the people, now Moses is heading to the tabernacle, and apparently they know it, and all the people rose up and stood every man at his tent door. Can you imagine that? Can you picture that? Every man stood at his tent door and looked after Moses until he was gone into the tabernacle. And it came to pass as Moses entered into the tabernacle, the cloudy pillar descended and stood at the door. Stood at the door. That's kind of, just file that away. Of the tabernacle. And the Lord talked to Moses. And all the people saw the cloudy pillar stand at the tabernacle door. And all the people rose up and worshiped, every man in his tent. Okay, I'm sorry. Yes? Yes. 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 Just try to let your mind just, get in on a drone and, and get above that and look down upon that. That here, somehow they knew Moses was going. Moses going to tabernacle. Hey, Moses going to tabernacle. I don't know, word of mouth, whatever. And as they did, and they would watch him and see him, and they stood every man at his tent door. That pillar of cloud or fire, pillar of cloud, I imagine, came down and rested upon that tent door. And the Lord talked with Moses. And they saw at a distance. I don't know how they did it. It would have been huge. They would just known that Moses was there. They could see the pillar. And they worshiped at their tent door. Okay, here's this small tabernacle protected. Levites, everybody. And so it's serious business. And I'm saying, because the church was never meant to replace the home. That's not what God intended, for the church to replace the home. Are you following my train of thought here? Look how small it was. Look how, yes, it was available. Yes, the priests were available. Yes, the sacrifices were available. But look how small it was, because it's intended for people's relationship with God to be carried out within the home. And I will say at least both in the home and in the church or the sanctuary. It's not a matter of either or. It's not a question of one or the other. It's both. It's both. And I think you see this beautifully illustrated here, where Moses goes and he speaks to God, and God is at the temple door, and all, but each man at his tent door worship God. Where is your tent door? So you understand what I'm talking about. Mine, I don't know why I'm crying. Mine is a little swing on the back porch. That's when I walk outside, sit on that swing, I can talk to God. And a lot of times he talks to me. And I just ask you this morning, where is your tent door? You're at home. You're at work. There may be somebody here at the church. There may not be somebody here at the church. You may not, and even if there was, would you come here? But where is your tent door? That yes, we're blessed here. Everything goes on here. But where is your tent door that you can worship God at? Maybe it's not even outside. Maybe it's like Jesus said, it's a closet. It's a place. It's a space that you go and you talk to God in your home. In your home. And this business of the only way we serve God, the only way we talk to God is when we go to church. God never intended that. If he did that, he would have had, okay, you guys, I want y'all to build this sanctuary where we can sit 50,000 people. And you're going to have 3 services. Yeah, more than that. But you're going to have to worship 7 days a week, 3 services to get all these people through there. It's because they were to worship at their tent door. And like I said, it's not either or. It's not, well, I can just worship God at home and I don't need to go to church. Well, that's a bunch of baloney too. It's not a matter of either or. It's a matter of both. Working in our lives to bring us into relationship with God. So that's one thing that needed to be done. But here we still talk about the tabernacle. Let's consider something else. And we're going back to that gate that leads into the tabernacle. And we just read here, it says that Moses stood at the door of the tabernacle. I challenge you, I encourage you to get your concordance out and look up door and look how many references there are to the door of the tabernacle. Now Numbers 10, 2 through 4 says, make thee 2 trumpets of silver, of a whole piece shalt thou make them, that thou may use them for the calling of the assembly and for the journeying of the camps. And when they shall blow with them, listen, those trumpets, 2 trumpets, solid silver, and when they shall blow with them, all the assembly shall assemble themselves to thee at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. And if they blow but 1 trumpet, then the princes. And if they, which are the heads of the thousands of Israel, shall gather themselves unto thee. But then if they blow with 2 trumpets, I should have added a verse there. If they blow with 2 trumpets, the entire congregation was to come and assemble at the door of the tabernacle. So it was never intended for the tabernacle for all these people to crowd into the courtyard of the tabernacle. But at the door of the tabernacle on the east side, you remember there was not the Levites. As far as the families of Levites, it was only Moses and Aaron and his sons on the east side. In other words, room was left there for the congregation, the assembly of the Jews to come to the door of the tabernacle. And if you go and look up, you see all kinds of things that happened to them at that door and what went on. And so it's at the door of that tabernacle that they would gather, and God would come down and would meet with the people and talk to the people. And they would use these trumpets. 1 trumpet, I believe is what they said, 1 trumpet, then the princes and the leaders would come. Because Moses needed to talk to them about something. But if they blew the 2 trumpets for an assembly, then the whole congregation, the whole people of Israel would come to the door of that temple to see what God had to say. And I'm running out of time, but I'm just going to say, it was at the door of the temple that Korah came with his censer and they rebelled against Moses and Aaron. And that's what God said. Y'all come to the door of the temple. And everybody all gathered around, and then God, in fact, they were all in rebellion against God, and God said, step back, Moses. I'm going to take them all out. Read it. It's over there. Let me see. Did I give you that reference? Numbers 16, 18 through 21. He said, I'm going to take them all out. But then Moses pleaded with God over it. This is at the door of the temple. Remember, that's the scene. And God told Moses to tell the people to separate themselves from the families of Korah and the others. And everybody kind of just stepped back. And that's when the ground opened up. And the families of Korah, 250 people, and their tents was swallowed up into the ground, and the ground closed over them. But that wasn't all. A plague broke out and destroyed many thousands more because of their rebellion. But it all came at that assembly at the door of the temple. When Balaam tried to curse Israel, and he could not. And so he told the king of Midian, I can't curse them. I can't do anything to hurt them. All we can do, I'm paraphrasing, all we can do is to get them to destroy themselves. You hear what I'm saying? I can't destroy them. I can't curse them. Neither can you. All we can do is get them, and that's what Balaam counseled the king of Midian. We can get them to destroy themselves. Bring the worship of Baal into their midst. Bring idols into their midst. Bring your women, and part of that worship of Baal was fornication. Bring that into their midst. And no, you can't destroy them. They will just destroy themselves. And that's exactly what was going on. But listen to this in Numbers 25, verse 5. And Moses said to the judges of Israel, slay ye every one his men that joined unto Baal Peor. I mean, that was serious business back then, folks. And behold, listen, okay, now I didn't read it there, but they're at the door of the temple. All of this idol worship and fornication is going on in the camp. And they have gathered at the door of the temple, and Moses says this to the leaders about slay every one of his men. Those in your group that have joined themselves to Baal Peor, you slay them. And as they're meeting there at the door of the temple, verse 6, and behold, one of the children of Israel came and brought unto his brethren. Listen to this. One of the children of Israel came and brought unto his brethren a Midianitish woman in the sight of Moses, and in the sight of all the congregation of the children of Israel, who were weeping before the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. Get the scene. Here these have gathered together at the door, and they are weeping and crying about what is going on. Is it too hard to see some similarities nowadays? Crying out before God about what is happening. And here is one of the children of Israel brought unto his brethren a Midianitish woman in the sight of Moses. Here they, are you getting what I'm talking about? Here they are weeping out and crying from God, and here comes this guy with this woman walking right through the group. Are we still talking about the clean and unclean, the profane and the holy? Are we still talking about there's got to be a boundary somewhere? There's got to be a point we will not cross. And here he comes, as bold as brass, walking through that congregation, heading to his tent. The door of the congregation. Well, verse 7, and when Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, saw it, he rose up from among the congregation and took a javelin in his hand. And you can read the rest for yourself. But when he saw that, he rose up and said, this is as far as it goes. This is as far as it goes. And he took a javelin in his hand. So, men were to worship in the door of their tent, but when God called them to the assembly by the trumpets, and they were called to the door of the tent, God would come down and speak and move, and things were done. And let me tell you, you pray at home, you go out on your porch, or you walk out at night and look up at the stars and you talk with God, that you should do that, and probably do it even more than what you are doing it, but you do it. But let me tell you something, there is something about the assembly. There is something about coming together that God comes down and things start to happen. It's not either or. You got to hear what I'm saying. I'm not talking about one or the other, either or. It's both, right hand, left hand, working together for the kingdom of God. And so there was the door of the tent, but there's also the door of the tabernacle. And I spent time on that and put a lot of discussion in it because, yes, we hear about the altar. Of course we do. And we hear about the laver. But the door of the tent had so much that's just, it's not even mentioned and it's overlooked. But if you look at that, all that's contained in that outer court, folks, being of bronze, there is judgment. Listen to me this morning. God is going to judge sin. Sin is always judged, one way or another. God is not going to overlook, wink at sin. My Bible says, the soul that sinneth, it shall die. That's what all of that bronze and everything is about. That is the basis. There is judgment. Judgment in this life, judgment in the life to come. Sin is going to be judged. Even in the Bible says, be not deceived. Don't be deceived. God is not going to wink at, overlook. But the whole message of the outer court then is, yes, all of the bronze and everything, as far as even the pillars around it, the foundation, the basis is judgment, held up by the pins of bronze of judgment. But it's capped by the silver of redemption. It doesn't end there, but it has to start there. It doesn't end at judgment, but it has to start at judgment. That sin is going to be judged. It will not be overlooked. God is not just going to wink at it. It is going to be judged, but there is redemption. We are saved from the penalties of sin. And that's what the silver on the capstone is. We're talking about the putting on the whole armor of God. And one part that I read, it referred to that we put on the helmet of salvation. The helmet, you could say, the helmet of redemption. And that is part of the armor of God in the New Testament. Well, in the Old Testament, he's saying there are those pillars that on the basis of it is bronze sockets, and then the acacia wood, but on top of it capped the helmet of redemption and of salvation. And then you come to the altar. The altar is bronze. It's judgment. But what happens at the altar? It is the sacrifice. The blood is poured out. And we have the atonement of your soul. But that doesn't take away from the judgment and from the bronze of the altar. But listen. Sin is the problem. We want to think, it's parents, it's society, on and on. I need to go to a psychiatrist. Sin is my problem. Sin is your problem. Sin is the world's problem. Sin is the problem. And Jesus is the solution. But by trying to change what the problem is, we miss it. The problem is sin. It's always been sin, always will be sin until it's changed. And the answer is Jesus Christ and what He did on the cross. The sacrifice, the blood given for the atonement of our soul. Okay, quick here. Listen. When a person came into that outer court, they hardly went. You see that picture there, that they would come in and offer a sacrifice or an offering. Priest would take it. Now they would lay hands. They would lay hands. If it's a sin offering, they would lay hands upon that sacrifice. They did it. They did it. They laid hands on that sacrifice, and they slew the sacrifice. Priest didn't do that. They did it. You've heard that business of, well, if you're the only person on earth, Jesus would have come and died. Oh, yeah, that sounds good. But do you realize you would have been the one that crucified Him? You would have nailed those nails. You would have hung Him on that cross. Not some Roman group of soldiers. If you were the only one, He would have died for you, but you would have been the one that hung Him on the cross. Anyway, man would come in, lay his hands on that sacrifice, confess his sin verbally to the priest, confess his sin. He would cut, and you could see some racks and tables and stuff. He would cut that lamb's or the sacrifice throat. The priest would catch the blood, and then it would apply to the altar. And then the priest would separate the sacrifice as necessary and do all of that. But that's just basically, or come in and offer some grain or whatever, and that was it, and they'd leave. You see all of this other stuff going on, and that's the priest. The sanctuary was basically for the priest. The laver was for the priest. No ordinary person ever used the water in the laver. It was for the priest. Well then, okay, what does that mean for us? Well, I got to quit. I got 1 minute here. My pages to turn. Anyway, it says over in 1 Peter that we're a royal priesthood. And one of the great, I don't have time. One of the great truths that came, that was restored in the Reformation, was the priesthood of the believer. Don't hear much, well, you do hear something about it. But the priesthood of the believer. That as a believer in Jesus Christ, our high priest has made us kings and priests unto God. That we are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood. In other words, the things of this sanctuary that I just barely touched upon can apply to us now. That as we serve this, as these priests serve that sanctuary and out of it the people, that as the priesthood of God now, we can do that. And I think there's a lot of Christians that don't realize they are the priesthood of the believer. There's got to be someone else. There's got to be a Virgin Mary. There's got to be a human priest. I got to go to confession. I got to do this. And what the Reformation brought about as a restoration of the priesthood of the believer. Do we realize that this morning? That we are kings and priests. We are a royal priesthood unto God. A peculiar, not weird,